All right. Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to another Bible study in 2 Samuel. Today, we're going to be in chapter 15, so if you're not there, you can turn there a while. We will get to that. But just beforehand, we're going to do a recap as usual, a nice brief recap, just to remind ourselves of where we're at. So I'm just going to recap. It's a little bit more recent with the Amnon and Tamar event. So we know that the Amnon and Tamar situation actually came out of what happened with David and Bathsheba. Now, it sounds strange saying that because how is that related? Well, God related that, right? God said to David, this is what's going to happen because of how you treated Bathsheba and Uriah. So we now saw sexual immorality and murder take place, just like we saw with David, right? So Amnon tricked Tamar, his beautiful sister. He wanted to sleep with her. He ended up violating her with Jonadab's advice. So then Absalom went to David and said, David, did you hear about Tamar? And David said, yeah, I'm really angry about it. And David didn't do anything after that, which is, crazy, especially he's the king, supposed to bring justice, right? But I talked about how, especially when it's people you know, family or friends, it's harder to bring justice because you want to show more mercy. And it's a difference between balance of mercy and justice, right? But that's what we saw there. So Absalom took it into his own hands, which is never good to take justice into your own hands, we learn here. Absalom was not correct. David had the authority to do that because of what went on, right? But Absalom didn't. Absalom murders his brother, and this causes a lot of chaos in the family. And of course, Absalom had to flee because he would have been put to death. David would have had to put him to death, and David struggled with that anyway, right? So Absalom fled to Geshur. That's where his grandfather was king, right? So his dad was king of Israel, but his grandfather was king of Geshur. So he said, I'm just going to go flee and hang out with my grandfather for 3 years. So it was 3 years, and he went there and hid out in exile, right? Because otherwise, he could have been killed. So last week was 2 Samuel 14, right? And we learned that Joab, he sent a wise woman to David to try to do that whole Nathan thing again, use a parable, right, to trick him into making his decisions. So they kind of went there to get him, and it was all about getting Absalom back to Jerusalem, right? Because David had this struggle. He loved his son, wanted to bring him back and restore him, but at the same time was also bitter that he killed Amnon, the crown prince, who was supposed to be the next king. So David struggled with this, and he didn't know what to do, and he delayed. And you're going to see that's David's problem now. He's too passive as a leader now because it's involving his family. He's not making decisions right away. Should he bring justice or should he bring mercy? He's just not deciding, and it's causing more issues. So Joab says, this is not, no, in his mind, I think he's like, this is not stable. This is not good for the kingdom. There's going to be a civil war. We got to make peace here. So he sends this woman from Tekoa to trick David into seeing that he should let Absalom go. It works. He says, you know what, you can bring Absalom here. So Absalom comes to Jerusalem then, right? Joab went and got him. And then Absalom asked Joab to see the king because David said he could come back into the kingdom, but I don't want to see him. He can't see my face. He can't come into my courts. So it was a partial restoration. And that's a problem. A partial restoration is no restoration at all. To have full and complete restoration, one party has to apologize, the other party has to forgive, right? So Absalom didn't ever apologize for killing Amnon, and David never forgave him for it. So we're in this sticky situation. That's why he was allowed in, but he was still kind of living, this, almost like he was a distant life anyway. So Absalom couldn't get Joab's attention, so he sets his field on fire. That's another thing. Don't ever take force. If you're not getting your own way, it's not a good idea to set people's property on fire to get their attention. You'll get their attention, but you'll ruin the relationship, right? And later on, we know Absalom and Joab's relationship is completely ruined after this, and I'm not surprised, right? So that happens. He gets his attention, and basically he says, I want to talk to the king. If I can't live here and see the king, why don't you guys just leave me in Geshur? What was the point of me coming back? So he makes that point. So he goes and sees King David, and he bows to David, and David kisses his hand. It's like, oh, and everybody there is probably like, oh, good, they made up, they're friends again. This is good. It's like, no. That was all external. And you guys have always thought about it. You guys have all seen in your life people externally make up, oh, they're good now. And the next thing you know, they're talking about this person, they're complaining about that person, they're back in fighting and arguing again. So we know what artificial restoration looks like, right? And that's what happened right here. So Absalom's back, and now it looks good. And that's how we ended last time, where it looks like David and Absalom made peace, but it was really only external, okay? And that's where we are now. And we're going to go ahead and jump right in to 2 Samuel 15. So go ahead and open up your Bibles there. We'll go ahead and jump on in. All right, 2 Samuel 15, verse number 1. After this, Absalom got himself a chariot and horses and 50 men to run before him. And Absalom used to rise early and stand beside the way of the gate. And when any man had a dispute to come before the king for judgment, Absalom would call to him and say, from what city are you? And when he said, your servant is of such and such a tribe in Israel, Absalom would say to him, see, your claims are good and right, but there's no man designated by the king to hear you. Then Absalom would say, oh, that I were a judge in the land. Then every man with a dispute or cause might come to me, and I would give him justice. And whenever a man came near to pay homage to him, he would put out his hand and take hold of him and kiss him. Thus Absalom did to all of Israel who came to the king for judgment. So Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel. And at the end of 4 years, Absalom said to the king, please let me go and pay my vow, which I have vowed to the Lord in Hebron. For your servant vowed a vow while I lived at Geshur in Aram, saying, if the Lord will indeed bring me back to Jerusalem, then I will offer worship to the Lord. The king said to him, go in peace. So he arose and went to Hebron. But Absalom sent secret messengers throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, as soon as you hear the sound of the trumpet, then say, Absalom is king at Hebron. With Absalom went 200 men from Jerusalem who were invited guests, and they went in their innocence and knew nothing. And while Absalom was offering the sacrifices, he sent for Ahithophel, the Gilonite, David's counselor from his city Gilo. And the conspiracy grew strong, and the people with Absalom kept increasing. And a messenger came to David, saying, the hearts of the men of Israel have gone after Absalom. Then David said to all his servants who were with him at Jerusalem, arise and let us flee, or else there will be no escape for us from Absalom. Go quickly, lest he overtake us quickly and bring down ruin on us and strike the city with the edge of the sword. And the king's servant said to the king, behold, your servants are ready to do whatever my lord the king decides. So the king went out, and all his household after him, and the king left 10 concubines to keep the house. And the king went out, and all the people after him, and they halted at the last house. And all his servants passed by him, and all the Kerethites, and all the Pelethites, and all the 600 Gittites who had followed him from Gath, passed on before the king. Then the king said to Ittai the Gittite, why do you also go with us? Go back and stay with the king, for you are a foreigner and also an exile from your home. You came only yesterday, and shall I today make you wander about with us since I go, I know not where? Go back and take your brothers with you, and may the Lord show steadfast love and faithfulness to you. But Ittai answered the king, as the Lord lives and as my lord the king lives, wherever my lord and the king shall be, whether for death or for life, there also will your servant be. And David said to Ittai, go then, pass on. So Ittai the Gittite passed on with all his men and all the little ones who were with him. And all the land wept aloud as all the people passed by. And the king crossed the brook Kidron, and all the people passed on toward the wilderness. And Abiathar came up, and behold, Zadok came also with all the Levites, bearing the ark of the covenant of God. And they set down the ark of God until the people had all passed out of the city. Then the king said to Zadok, carry the ark of God back into the city. If I find favor in the eyes of the Lord, he will bring me back, and let me see both it and his dwelling place. But if he says, I have no pleasure in you, behold, here I am. Let him do to me what seems good to him. The king also said to Zadok the priest, are you not a seer? Go back to the city in peace with your 2 sons, Ahimaaz, your son, and Jonathan, the son of Abiathar. See, I will wait at the fords of the wilderness until word comes from you to inform me. So Zadok and Abiathar carried the ark of God back to Jerusalem, and they remained there. But David went up the ascent of the Mount of Olives, weeping as he went, barefoot and with his head covered. And all the people who were with him covered their heads, and they went up, weeping as they went. And it was told David, Ahithophel is among the conspirators with Absalom. And David said, O Lord, please turn the counsel of Ahithophel into foolishness. While David was coming to the summit where God was worshipped, behold, Hushai the Archite came to meet him with his coat torn and dirt on his head. David said to him, if you go on with me, you will be a burden to me. But if you return to the city and say to Absalom, I will be your servant, O king, as I have been your father's servant in time past, so now I will be your servant, then you will defeat for me the counsel of Ahithophel. Are not Zadok and Abiathar the priests with you there? So whatever you hear from the king's house, tell it to Zadok and Abiathar the priests. Behold, their 2 sons are with them there, Ahimaaz, Zadok's son, and Jonathan, Abiathar's son. And by them you shall send to me everything you hear. So Hushai, David's friend, came into the city just as Absalom was entering Jerusalem. All right, and that's the end of chapter 15. There's a lot to unpack there about what's going on here. So, verse number 1, it starts out by saying that Absalom got himself a chariot and horses and 50 men to run before him. So remember, he's been restored, so it looks like David just kissed his hand. Everything looks good Jerusalem. And now he's getting these chariots and these horses and 50 men. So what this does is it creates an image of royalty. It's kind of like when you see like the big celebrities or politicians, they roll with their motorcades and all these people ahead of them when they do the parades and stuff. It's something like that. He's making himself look like a royalty, like a royal king. Now, he is royalty, but the issue is we've never seen David ever even do this. We never see David have his armies and men always around him marching. So Absalom is trying to look like he has a lot of power. It's a symbol of power here, right? And you can see the difference. Like I said, we never really seen David had all these chariots and horses. I mean, he had them in war, but it doesn't talk about him parading them around for no reason. There's no war going on. The Absalom needed all this stuff. So he's just like, looking tough, basically. Remember what Psalm 20 says. You can see there's two different kinds of people. Psalm 20, verse 7, some trust in chariots and some in horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord our God. So you can see right here, he's trying to show the strength of the horses and chariots, and that verse shows that was a sign, a symbol of strength and trusting in military over God. So you can see David trusting God. Absalom's kind of full of himself and wants to have this look. So just be aware of people that will seek power and attention rather than servanthood. And that's what he wanted. He wanted the power and the attention there. Verse 2 says, and Absalom used to rise early and stand beside the way of the gate. So the city gate was a place where legal judgments took place. So the city gate was kind of like their courthouse. So every morning he rose early. So he's on his game, right? He didn't sleep in. First thing he did, woke up real early, went right down to the courthouse, basically. Well, why is he going down there? Because that's where all the people brought their disputes that they were upset about. Somebody was bothering them. They have an argument. Somebody's fighting or whatever. And they'd come to try to settle these issues here. And Absalom would get to them before they could get to King David. Because that's why they were going there. Because the king just didn't rule over the land. He actually decided and ruled justly on what to do with everything. So before they could get to David, Absalom would almost beat him there, and he'd hang out there. And it was a strategic move, right? This is a political move to start to gain power because he's mad at David, wants to kill David, hates David for not doing anything about his sister, right? And now hasn't restored him fully, and there's still that animosity there. So he's now acting like a self-appointed leader. Because nobody said, you don't read about, then Absalom was appointed to go handle the court cases for David. You don't see any of that. He just jumped in and said, I'll start, I want to hear what you have to say, right? And it goes on, it says, and when any man had a dispute to come before the king for judgment, they're looking for David, Absalom would call to him and say, from what city are you? So, these people are coming here, they're all angry, they have something, or they're distraught, something crazy is going on. And he's not a judge, right? He's not the king, he's a crown prince. And Absalom would say, hey, what's your name? Where are you from? To show that he cares about them. Like, where are you from and how can I help you? So he's starting to kind of soften up and seems sincere, right? He's asking them questions about them to get these people to feel like he's sincere and he cares about their issue. And then look what it says later. He says, see, your claims are good and right, but there is no man designated by the king to hear you. So the king, he says that the king doesn't have time to ever handle their issues and their tribes, wherever they're from. He's trying to point out that David's administration is flawed. There's not real justice here. I know you guys have issues, but there's nobody here by the king to even hear your argument. Isn't that a shame, guys? Isn't that a shame? Then he says down in verse 4, oh, that I were judge in the land. Then every man with a dispute or cause might come to me, and I would give him justice. So Absalom here is not saying, I should be king. I should be the king there. He's starting to plant these seeds, which is what some people do, to sow discord and chaos. He's like, oh, where are you guys from? Oh, what a shame you guys are going through. There's nobody really here to help you. If I were in charge, I'd help you, but I'm not really in charge, so I don't know how we could even help you here, right? So he's starting to open he's starting to plant the seeds, and they're like, well, I wish Absalom, I can imagine people, I wish Absalom were king. He would have said what he told me. He's there every morning. He cares. He shows up there every morning, the first thing, because he loves the people. I wish David would be more like Absalom. So he starts to plant all the seeds of discord here, right? It's, the classic, you see this with politicians all the time. Like, these are every election, especially when there's a former administration, no matter what, right? The next election will be the same. Like, if I were in charge, this would have never happened. If I were in charge, you'd have this, right? And everybody says that. When whoever's the president now, the other party says, if we were in charge, the economy wouldn't be tanking, or you wouldn't be losing all this money. Or if I were in charge, so you see that today all over the world. It's so easy. What these things are is people love to give simple answers to complex problems, right? That's what it is. These problems are usually very complex, and they'll oversimplify them to make it look like nothing's getting done, right? Because that's how politics are. Even when you hear the politicians say, if I were in charge, I would fix the economy. Do you know how complex that is? And they'll usually just say these things, well, I'll fix this and help you. And it's like these vague answers. A lot of times from politicians, just going to give you these vague answers so you pull for them. That's what Absalom's doing. Absalom's one of the earliest, best politicians here in the worst way. He's one of those bad politicians that's going to use flattery to gain power and I just care about you guys. That's why I want to be in charge. I just want to help your guys' problems. When really we know Absalom is power hungry. He had those chariots and horses. He's full of pride. He has his hair. We already learned about that last chapter. So he's a prideful man parading around about caring for you guys, basically the people of Israel is how he was acting. Verse number 5. Whenever a man came near to pay homage to him, he would put out his hand and take hold of him and kiss him. So here now, people saw Absalom like, oh, that's the prince. I want to bow. And he go, no, you don't bow to me. I'll kiss your hand. So he's almost, before they could even do it, no, not for me. You don't have to do that for me. I'm so lowly. I'm not the king. I'm not anybody special. I'm just Absalom. He is so crafty, so smooth of a con man that he now looks to them. And if you're in Israel, you'd probably look at him. You wouldn't know, if you didn't know his backstory, but that's so funny. When you go to learn some of these people, I'd seen it in my own life, people can look nice on the outside, but when you get closer and closer, you can find darker and darker things about these people. But if you're far enough away and you only see them in these certain lights, you won't see that. And that's how it was here. If you saw Absalom every morning in the courthouse, you'd think he's nothing but a good guy. He's always there to help the people. He's always asking where they're from. He's not letting them bow to him. He's always down here just caring for the people. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, Absalom's trying to steal his father's throne, right? But nobody there would ever accuse him of that because he's just so nice and he just cares about us. He doesn't care about himself. He's all about the people. So Absalom is very crafty and he continues to pretend to be full of humility, all to gain power. And that still happens. That still happens today. Trust me. Verse number 6, it says, thus Absalom did to all of Israel who came to the king for judgment. So Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel. So right there, stole the hearts of men. He convinced them, right? He stole the hearts, not through truth, but through deception, right? He wasn't being honest. He did it through deception, but he got them and he convinced them, right? And the thing is, this went on, you'll read later, I think it says for 4 years, right? So it was a 4-year process that Absalom was doing this. You have to imagine that at some point David heard about this, right? Wouldn't David know Absalom's down there every morning and he's like telling people that he'd help them better than you're helping them. David had to have heard that over 4 years, right? But what does David do? Nothing, right? David's going to get into issues again. He's going to ignore it. It's like, that's a small issue. I'm the king. I'd imagine, David doesn't say this in the Bible, but I can imagine David hears this like, I'm the king, not worried about Absalom. I'm in charge, not really afraid of him, not really worried. He can say that all he wants. I'll take care of it. I get accused all the time. People in leadership, you get accused all the time of, you should do this, you should do that. So David's like, I've heard it before. I don't care. It's Absalom doing his thing. I don't care. But because he didn't stop this, he let this discord go on and sow seeds of discord. It became worse and worse and worse. So as leaders, you can't ignore small issues. They become big problems. And that's what happened right here to David. We also see how rebellion can often begin with subtle manipulation. Absalom just didn't do this, steal their hearts in a month or 2 months. Over 4 years, he did this subtly, and over time, the compound effect. Over time, Absalom looked like the greatest king ever that wasn't ever king. And they probably really thought, man, he would be the best, right? So that's what's going on here. Now we go down to verse 7. So yeah, it says, at the end of 4 years, so you can see his rebellion was slow and strategic. He took 4 years. He had crafted this in his mind. He didn't just do it right away. He slowly won more and more people, because with more time, you get more fans, right? That's how it works. And that's what he did there. Then it says, now he goes over to King David, and he's going to fake some spirituality here. Look, he says, please let me go and pay my vow. And look where he wants to pay it, in Hebron. Now remember, this was David's first capital. Hebron was where David used to be the capital. Remember when he didn't have all the 12 tribes? He moved up to Jerusalem to make it more to show that he was going to be the king for all of Israel. So Absalom says, hey, you know what? I made a promise to God that if God ever let me go back to Jerusalem, I'd go down to Hebron and I'd pay my vow to him. So I gotta go do that. And of course, David is going to, say like, that's for God, so you might as well do it. So he's using God, and people can do this as well. He's going to make it seem so godly. He's going to use God to manipulate the situation and to try to do this whole rebellion, because that's where he's going to go and have the rebellion is in Hebron. But he's pretending it's godly, which is really interesting. So it says, if the Lord will indeed bring me back, I will offer worship. So there's some more. He invokes God's name there again to make his deception seem righteous. And then it says, the king said to him, go in peace. David failed to see the warning signs here. Like, wait a minute. I know Absalom for the last 4 years has been undermining me and saying he'd do a better job. But I'll let him go because it's for God, right? And that you got to be careful because people can use God all the time. I mean, you ever hear the people like, God told me this? And it's like, well, that's pretty bold to say. And now you're using this so that I listen to whatever you say. Unless God audibly told you this, you say, I believe God wants me to. You might want to say that rather than God told me, because people invoke God all the time to make it seem like their way is better. And that's what Absalom's doing. He's using God to basically trick David into letting him go without any problems. And David allows it, right? Verse 10, but Absalom sent secret messengers throughout all the tribes of Israel. So now you see he has a coordinated political move here. There's a coordinated political move. He's now going to have secret messengers. So now it's not only Absalom at the courthouse. Now he has a couple people on his side. Now he's starting to build his political cabinet, so to speak, but quietly, right? So he has this. He's starting to get, he knew he needed the nationwide support. He's not going to overthrow David without the support of the men. He stole the men's hearts, but he still needs to keep his momentum growing. You always want to gain more popularity in politics, right? You always want to gain more popularity and get more people to keep your power. And he's going to get ready to take this power, so he's going to need it here. All right, so it says, let's see, verse 10. Did I skip down too far? Yeah, verse 10, go to piece. Verse 10. Let me get back over here into my scripture here. So what it says, I'm lost, losing my place. I can't find it here. Oh, here it is. But Absalom sent secret messengers throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, as soon as you hear the sound of the trumpet, then say, Absalom is king at Hebron. So that trumpet sound also signifies a new king. So that's why there's a trumpet sound. When there's a trumpet sound, that's to announce there's going to be a new king. That'll basically announce publicly that it's war. Civil war is going to take place. There's a rebellion, and Absalom is going to try to take over these secret plans. All right, so verse 11, with Absalom went 200 men from Jerusalem who were invited guests, and they went in their innocence and knew nothing. So these men were used as his political props. They said, hey, you guys want to come with me? I'm going down to Hebron. You guys want me to come down? I have a bunch of guys going with me. Like, yeah, sure, I'll go to Hebron. I haven't been to Hebron in a while. Yeah, let's go down. So he got 200 men because it says they were innocent and knew nothing. He didn't tell them, hey, I'm going to announce myself as king. Come down with me. We're going to take over. He didn't say anything. He just acted like, hey, let's go on vacation together. Let's go down to Hebron. Let's go hang out. And he convinces 200 men from Jerusalem. He invited them as guests, it says, right? And this gives the illusion that respected men supported him, right? You could do this today to people. You could go find respected men. Hey, you guys want to go to dinner? Like, yeah, sure. And now all of a sudden you're around these important people. Like, oh, wow, he must be important. Look at all these people with him. So that's what Absalom wanted to look for, and it worked, essentially. So now people are going to see Absalom going down to Hebron, and there's these 200 men, really nice men from Jerusalem. It's like, wow, he must be legit. If they're with him, he must be legit. So Absalom is trying to make himself look even more legitimate as time goes on. It says, while Absalom was offering the sacrifices, he sent for Ahithophel. So this is interesting, right? So Ahithophel was one of David's closest counselors, one of his friends. And actually, David in Psalm 41 will write about this. Psalm 41 is about Ahithophel here, we believe. It says, even my close friend in whom I trusted, who ate my bread, has lifted his heel against me. So Ahithophel is another version of Judas, another archetype of Judas. So Ahithophel would have been great friends with David, probably just like Judas was, quote unquote, great friends with Jesus, right? Even though Jesus knew his true colors. Ahithophel's the same way. It was one of his best counselors, but Absalom calls for him, and he essentially goes with him. Now, why would Ahithophel betray David? It's an interesting thought. They're such good friends. Why would he betray David? Well, Ahithophel might have a little bit of bitterness in his mind, and he might be a little bit against David. Why? Well, if you look at the genealogies and you look at whose son is who, Ahithophel's granddaughter is Bathsheba, okay? So when you start to realize, oh, wait a minute, and he knows what David did. And he never forgave David for his sin with Bathsheba and Uriah. And I liked Uriah. I liked my son. I liked my grandson-in-law. Like, what were you doing to him? So Ahithophel, probably in the back of his mind, like, well, David's a dirty scoundrel anyway. I know what he did to my granddaughter, what he forced her to do, and what he did to her husband. So Ahithophel, although they were really good friends, maybe had a problem still, just like Absalom. And maybe that's why he kind of went with Absalom. It's like, yeah, your dad is kind of, he does have his issues. I know what he did to my family, right? So it's important to know that Ahithophel is related to all this. That's why, because otherwise there's no reason why he'd even do this. But there's a little bit of family buy-in there again, right? He has people that have been affected by David. So there's a little bit of bitterness and unforgiveness even in Ahithophel, right? And we'll continue on. And the conspiracy grew strong, and the people with Absalom kept increasing. So now he's starting to gain more and more momentum, more and more fans, more and more people love Absalom, more people are joining him here. All right, verse 13. The hearts of the men of Israel have gone after Absalom. A messenger came to David saying, the hearts of the men of Israel have gone after Absalom. So David finally finds out that all these men are now joining Absalom, right? David knows it's no good. He says, arise and let us flee, or else there will be no escape for us from Absalom. Go quickly, let us overtake us quickly and bring down ruin on us and strike the city with the edge of the sword. Basically, David knew it was going to be a war. I don't think he even wanted to go to war. And he's like, you know what? I'm just going to flee. We just got to get out of here. And the king's servant said to the king, behold, your servants are ready to do whatever my lord the king decides. So there you can see he still has loyal people. There will always be loyal ones that remain. If you're true, David was the true king, and he was the one in the right here. Absalom was the one in the wrong. It can feel like everybody's betraying you, and all the people are blinded by these liars that are convincing them that they're good, but they're really doing evil things. I've seen it. And you can think it feels like all the people are following, but no, there's true, faithful people that will always know the truth and stick with the truth and not betray or turn against anything with the evil there. So you can see there's still true followers of David, even in the hardship, and that's how it is today. The majority followed Absalom's deception, but the faithful few stayed with David in his suffering. And it kind of reminds me of Jesus in John 6, when he says, after this, many of his disciples turned back and no longer walked with him. So Jesus said to the 12, do you want to go away as well? Simon Peter answered him, Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. So you can see this pattern again. Jesus went through this, where Jesus, remember, he says about eating, you got to eat my flesh and drink my blood. And they're like, I can't handle that. And all these people started to leave. And Jesus is like, you guys want to leave? They're like, no, we're with you, Jesus. Same thing here with David. He's got a faithful remnant. I forgot to give my pictures here. Here we go. All right, so the king went out, all his household after him. So it shows that, he's going to leave. He's going to leave. He had once entered Jerusalem as a conquering king. Now he's going to leave it in sorrow and shame. And it's basically repeating that pattern that he did with Saul. He had to take off and run from Saul. He's going to have to do it from his son now. And it says that the king left, in verse 16, 10 concubines to keep the house. Why would he leave 10 of his concubines, basically his mistresses? Why would he leave them behind? Well, to take care of the house, make sure the palace is in order, make sure, things kind of went smoothly. He didn't want everything to fall to destruction. But we know later in 2 Samuel 16, next week we'll get to that, those 10 concubines will come into play, and Absalom will, you'll read about that next week. That will come into play when he leaves those 10 concubines there. And the king went out, and all the people after him, and they halted at the last house. So right there, and it says they halted at the last house. It shows that he's walking out of the city, and he stops, and he probably takes one more good look about it, probably with tears in his eyes. Like, I don't want to leave. It's almost kind of how, you ever go on vacation and you're at the beach and then you pack up and you're the last person to close the hotel door. But before you close it, you look at the bed and you look out at the ocean and, all right, I'll leave. And you close it. He was getting one good last look at Jerusalem because he doesn't know if he's going to come back. He had to run from Saul for years. He doesn't know how this is going to go, right? All right, continuing on to verse 18. It says, and all his servants passed by him, and all the Kerethites, and all the Pelethites, and all the 600 Gittites who had followed him from Gath, passed on before the king. So what's interesting right there, Kerethites and Pelethites and Gittites, these are all foreigners. These aren't Jewish people. These aren't Israelites. They're foreigners actually a lot of them are from the Philistines, from Philistia. So they'd be from the enemy. So what's so interesting to see is that these foreigners had more loyalty to David than his own people of Israel. They had more faith in him as a king than the Jewish people did, which is ironic, right? But that's how it can go sometimes, right? Reminds me of what Jesus said in Luke 7. When Jesus heard this, he marveled at him and turned to the crowd that followed him and said, I tell you, not even Israel have I found such faith, right? So it shows you that sometimes there's foreigners, people not from, it shows you it's not always important to be a certain bloodline or a blood type, right? Faithfulness can come from anybody. And this is a sign of the Gentiles again, right? There's Gentiles now following David, right? This is a sign that Gentiles will follow Christ because David is supposed to be the Christ prototype. And all this good stuff, not the bad stuff, the good stuff, right? Christ is a much better king than David. So it says here that David now is going to talk to Ittai. Then the king said to Ittai the Gittite, why do you also go with us? Go back and stay with the king, for you are a foreigner and also an exile from your home. You came only yesterday. Shall I today make you wander about with us since I go I know not where? So Ittai was a Philistine from Gath. Guess who else is from Gath? Goliath. He's from Goliath's hometown. And this guy just recently, it says, he hasn't been here for 4 years. He just showed up the other day. David said, you just joined me the other day, man. Bad timing. You should have been here years ago. This is a bad time to join my side. Just go back to Philistia, buddy. I don't blame you. You don't want this. I don't even know where I'm going to go. I've wandered around before. Saul chased me around here before. I don't know when God's going to bring back, if he's ever going to do it. Why don't you just go back? But I love what he says. As the Lord lives, and as my Lord the King lives, wherever my Lord the King shall be, whether for death or for life, there also will your servant be. Ittai says, nope. I'm with you, David. I'm loyal. It's another loyal Gentile, right? I'm loyal to you and Yahweh. I know your God's better than Dagon, the God back in Philistia. I don't want to go back to that God. Your God's the real one true God, right? And this is very much, again, I love the Bible. It says patterns. Ruth 1:16, for where you go, I will go. And where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. So Ittai actually sounds like Ruth here. Same kind of thing. I'm a Gentile, I know, but I'm with you. Wherever you go, I'm going. Whoever your God is, that's my God. I'm not following Dagon. I'm following Yahweh now. And you see that here. And he pledges allegiance. So, and David said to Ittai, go then, pass on. So David accepts his faithfulness. And it says that his entire household came, which is awesome. Ittai says his little ones passed, so his wife, his kids. He's moving his whole family. This is Ittai leaving Philistia. He has a family, and he's bringing the family out into the wilderness. That's how dedicated he is to the Lord and to David, which is really interesting. So you see here then in verse 23, and the land wept about as all the people passed by. So the whole land's crying. This is a national tragedy. This is their king. The people with them love this. They're in tears. They can't believe David waited all those years to become king and to be the ruler of Israel and to unify this place, and now he's leaving again. What in the world is going on? They want their king back, but this is such a travesty, and Absalom is now taken over. Let's go to move on down here. We'll move the last few verses here. The Ark of the Covenant arrived here. It says, and Abiathar came, and behold, Zadok came also with all the Levites bearing the Ark of the Covenant of God, and they set down the Ark of God until the people had passed out of the city. So remember, the Ark of the Covenant symbolizes God's presence. So the two priests come with it to show that God is with the people, and they're ready to bring the Ark of the Covenant out. But then the king said to Zadok, carry the Ark of God back into the city. If I find favor in the eyes of the Lord, he will bring me back, and let me see both it and his dwelling place. So David refused to see this as a good luck charm. They made that mistake back in 1 Samuel 4, right? And the Philistines got it. They tried to use it in battle. It doesn't work like that. David knows that. David says, God will be with me. I don't need the Ark of the Covenant. You take the Ark of the Covenant back where it's supposed to be in Jerusalem. You take it back to his city. If God wants me to be with him at the Ark of the Covenant, he'll bring me back into Jerusalem. And if not, well, I deserve it. So David's almost like kind of, saying like, I get whatever I get. I'll let God decide. God's going to figure this out. I did a lot of sin. God might be punishing me, but send the Ark of the Covenant. I don't need that. It's not the way you treat the Ark of the Covenant. It's not a relic that you're supposed to carry around as a good luck charm, right? So you see that there. Then he starts to approach Zadok as a seer, right? With spiritual insight. He says, are you not a seer? See, I will wait at the fords of the wilderness until word comes from you to inform me. So David here sends Zadok and Abiathar back to Jerusalem, not only to take the Ark of the Covenant back, but to be his informants. Genius move, David. David's going to install some spies now in his land so he can figure out what Absalom's doing there in Jerusalem and what's going on. So David trusted God. He did trust God, but still sent spies to gather intelligence, which shows that faith doesn't always mean ignoring wise strategy, right? You can have faith that God's going to do things, but it also sometimes takes real strategy on your part. David could just kick back and like, well, God he'll send people to give me all this. He's like, no. I trust God, but I'm also going to be wise enough to create this network of spies and a communication network. And that's essentially what he's doing here. So Zadok and Abiathar, they carried the Ark of God back to Jerusalem, and they remained there. So Zadok and Abiathar are faithful. They join. They say, all right, we'll be your spies, and they go back. It says, but David went up to the ascent of the Mount of Olives, weeping as he went. And this is really interesting because I know somebody else who's wept on the Mount of Olives 1,000 years after this, and that was Jesus. So again, when you read the story of David, you can see Jesus' story foreshadowed in there. Because this is where Jesus weeps over, oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem. Remember, he's like weeping over everything? That was at the Mount of Olives here. So you can see that pattern here. David also walked barefoot with his head covered. So the barefoot, that's humility. Remember when Moses had to take off the sandals, be barefoot? That's humility to God. David is showing humility to the Lord here, showing that he's distraught and needs the Lord. Verse 30, and all the people who were with him covered their heads, and they went up weeping as well. So David's not alone. They're going to weep. They're all kind of mourning this whole situation. David's crying. They're crying. It would have been a sad situation to watch this march out of the city, everybody in tears, not knowing what was going to happen next. And it was told to David, Ahithophel is among the conspirators with Absalom. So David finally finds out that he's been betrayed, right? Like I said, he's betrayed earlier. Psalm 55 also says, for it is not an enemy who taunts me, then I could bear it. It is not an adversary who deals insolent with me, then I could hide from him. But it is you, a man, my equal, my companion, my familiar friend. David was really hurt by this. He wrote multiple Psalms about Ahithophel, right? Just like Jesus had to say, he who ate my bread has lifted his heel against me. Again, there's that pattern of Judas. But look what David does right away. He doesn't go, oh, darn, Ahithophel, that jerk, He says, oh, Lord, please turn the counsel of Ahithophel into foolishness. He actually takes action. He prays about it. He says, Lord, please, what he's doing is evil. Lord, you take care of it, right? Lord, you have my vengeance, right? So he turns to prayer, which is a good thing. You should always pray when the situation, rather than just grumble about something, take it to the Lord, and the Lord will decide how to handle it. But he said, and you'll find out later, God does end up answering his prayers later on. Verse 32, while David was coming to the summit where God was worshipped, behold, Hushai the Archite came to meet him, and his coat torn and dirt on his head. So he goes to meet him where God worships. This suggests David was still praying or seeking God's guidance. He's at the place where he should worship. He's in a place of worship, and this guy named Hushai shows up, right? A coat torn, dirt on his head. So he's mourning. He's in distress just like everybody else. David said to him, verse 33, if you go on with me, you will be a burden to me. Now, that sounds bad at first. Like, oh, man, that's really not nice to say. But we think Hushai might have been an old man. He might have been a little older. Like, it's going to be a little bit, if we bring you on, it's going to take a little bit of effort to bring you on, okay? But I don't want to reject you. I got a better idea, Hushai. I got a better idea for you, Hushai. If you return to the city and say to Absalom, I will be your servant, O king, as I have been your father's servant in times past, so now I will be your servant, then you will defeat for me the counsel of Ahithophel. So David says, listen, you can travel with us. I know you're with us, and we love you, Hushai. But you're kind of an old man. It's going to take a little bit of effort for us. You could be way more useful. You could go and cause our own deception. You can go back and manipulate the king for me and manipulate Ahithophel's counsel, because Ahithophel is going to give Absalom counsel. And back then, Ahithophel it was like his wisdom was from an angel of God. Ahithophel was one of the greatest, and the Jews have a lot. You can read about Ahithophel. The Jews have a lot to say about Ahithophel and how wise he was, and that God was basically a direct channel to him. So David's worried because Ahithophel had some of the greatest advice in the entire kingdom. So he says, well, here's a strategy. You can go in. If you can convince the king to listen to you over Ahithophel, that's good enough for me, Hushai. How about just go back to Jerusalem? So that's what he says to Ahithophel there. And that's being wise as a serpent and innocent as a dove, right? He's being wise, innocent. He's got this plan, right? So whatever you hear from the king's house, so this is in verse 35, it says, so whatever you hear from the king's house, tell it to Zadok and Abiathar the priests. Behold, their 2 sons are with them there, Ahimaaz, Zadok's son, and Jonathan, Abiathar's son. And by them you shall send everything to me. So David organized his own system of messengers, right? Remember, Absalom had his own secret messengers. Well, now David has his own secret messengers. It says, Hushai, you're going to tell the priests, Zadok and Abiathar, and then I have their 2 sons, Ahimaaz and Jonathan. They're going to be carriers of the message, and it's going to be good. So it's going to be all these people, this network of people, so you can't really pin it down to one person, and that's how David's going to get his information. Remember, David said, I'm going to go at the fords of the rivers in the wilderness. So David already has a location. There's a secret rendezvous meetup in the wilderness where David's going to stay and collect this information. So now he has the priests back there with the Ark of the Covenant. They can do God's work while they can kind of listen in. Hushai is going to go and try to manipulate Absalom to listen to him over Ahithophel. When he figures out what Absalom or Ahithophel says, he's going to go tell Zadok and Abiathar, and they're going to tell Ahimaaz and Jonathan. Why wouldn't Abiathar and Zadok go? Well, they have to be working in the temple because they're the priests, right? But also, nobody's going to expect Ahimaaz and Jonathan. These are just the sons of the priests. Nobody's expecting them to do all this. A lot of the eyes are going to be on Zadok and Abiathar, right? So it's kind of like passing the message along to be unsuspecting. And Ahimaaz and Jonathan are going to be the ones to deliver the message there. And that is how that chapter ends there. So do we have any questions or comments based on this? Yeah, Bill.
Question.
Yeah.
Verse 7.
Yes.
You said 4 years. And my
Oh,
Bible said
40 years. Yes.
Okay.
That is I'm glad you brought that. I forgot I wanted to mention that. So there's two things that we think there are. So when it says 40 years, some people think 40 years, Absalom was 40 years old, and that's what it meant after 40 years. But we also know later 4 years, or we know it was 4 years that he was there doing all this stuff. So sometimes there can be textual variance too, you'll find out, based on how scribes relate them. You'll find out later when we get to another chapter, it'll say that Elhanan killed Goliath, right? And he didn't really. It was the brother of Goliath. So sometimes in the Bible, there are these things called textual variants, and they'll have these scribal errors, is what it is. It doesn't mean the Bible's wrong, but what happens is these scribal errors over time will be written in. So some people wrote 40 years, some wrote 4 years. The good news is we have all the originals, so we know like 99.95% accuracy what it actually meant. But every once in a while, you'll get these scribal errors, so depend on the translation there. So some people think that when the scribe wrote that, in that translation, that it meant that he was 40 years old. And others, like me, think it was maybe supposed to say 4 years, but they ended up adding a 0 there. So that's a really good question. You're going to find that, like I said, in a couple chapters, actually, you'll find the same thing with Goliath. The nice thing about that one, the reason that we know it was Goliath's brother that was killed and not Goliath, you'll find out it's written in the Chronicles as well. That levels that out. But that'll happen. That was a really good question.
I could go with the 40 years old.
Yeah, 40 years old, exactly. Yeah, because that's what we think. It was probably 40 years old. So sometimes it'll happen like that, like I said, with scribal errors, and they're called textual variants. And you'll hear, like Wesley Huff just had to deal with this, where an atheist said, you said that Isaiah is word for word, but you're actually wrong. That would be nice if it was, but it's not. There's variations. Like, well, yeah, the variations sometimes are or they forgot to put the word brother, or they put 40 instead of 4. What we can do is go back to the original Dead Sea Scrolls or whatever, the old 200 BC. We can look at these scripts and say, oh, it was a little bit of a textual variant there. God's word is still kept there. And these textual variants don't ever like, oh, because it says 40 instead of 40, you can't be a Christian now. Or because it said get Goliath instead of the brother of Goliath, well, now the whole Bible's wrong. None of the textual variants that we find ever impact theology. So that's another thing when people tell you about these things. Well, how come my translation says this or the Bible says this? Say those are textual variants and we know about them. You can actually go read the old Hebrew if you know how to read Hebrew, and you can read the actual scripts there. So I'm really glad you brought that up, Bill, because I actually wanted to bring that up. And I'll get to textual variants a little bit more, like I said, in a couple weeks yet, still probably. Any other comments or questions? All right, well, thank you again, everybody. Go ahead and read ahead. Chapter 16 will be in, Lord willing, next week. Until then, keep reading your Bibles and keep your lamps trimmed and burning.